seen over the past decade, well, 20 years really, has been most of the clinical research has been around researching particular models and whether or not those models work, and there's been a lot of political fallout around those models, and what we've done, and Bob and I have certainly championed this agenda, is to build an eclectic approach to treating trauma, and doing that in an evidence-based way by using the active ingredients of all treatments in a structured and organized way of administering what works across all treatments to trauma survivors in a treatment that is palatable and usable for them. And so this whole course is really organized around this material. Everything we're doing from here on out is about integrating this material into your practice. And so we want to show you how we got it and where it's come from. I'm going to do that first half, and then Bob's going to introduce the treatment structure, which the rest of this course is organized around helping you to be able to become skilled and have mastery of moving through the treatment trajectory with somebody that has post-traumatic stress, and being able to do that in a way that you know what's going, you can explain what's coming, you can explain those pieces for your client, and then attenuate those pieces in a way that fit best for your client and best helps them. And I'm foreshadowing that. It'll get clearer as we go through. So I'm just giving you the overview on that right now. So let me jump in and get us through this. And what I'm going to do first is to show you how we have ended up with the active ingredients. And I will start with one of my heroes. If any of you have ever seen me do the CCTP, you know that I am a fanboy of the good Joseph Volpe, who came to the United States from South Africa because he was a fanboy of B.F. Skinner, and he was really excited about because up until I think he moved to the U.S. in 1955, and up until that point, the whole field was dominated by psychodynamic psychotherapy. You know, everybody did. If you did psychotherapy, you did psychodynamic. Well, comes Skinner, is the first scientist practitioner that we had. You know, the first one that began to look at a scientific approach to treating patients, and that really jazzed Joseph Volpe. And he came to U.S. and he spent a year at Stanford and then to the University of Virginia. And he started working with people that had anger first and then anxiety conditions. And what he found was just miraculous, just amazing, is that when he took people that were angry, and when he helped them to get in relaxed bodies, they weren't angry anymore. And that's just so cool to me, is that it's just such a simple resolution. And he wrote a whole freaking book about it, and nobody paid any attention to him. And there's his book right there. That was 1956. And he continued to do that. And in the 60s, started working, moved wider than anger into anxiety disorders. And he discovered this principle and started to write more about this principle of reciprocal inhibition, which is pairing exposure with relaxation. Is that, what he said is, you take a conditioned stimulus that produces conditioned response of anxiety, and when you can get that conditioned stimulus paired with relaxation, you get extinguishing of that conditioned response. The anxiety goes away. And, what's happened is that has become the underlying engine of all effective trauma treatments. Every single effective trauma treatment uses this, some way does exposure paired with relaxation. So that is an active ingredient of trauma. Now we've split those out, and we've talked about, different particular exposure processes and different relaxation processes, but they're in every treatment, they are paired to, and that's what desensitization is the capitalization of the utilization of reciprocal inhibition. That is exposure therapy, and every treatment does that. So moving on past Joseph Fulpe is one of my personal heroes. Again, and this man is a professor at the University of the Netherlands in Utrecht. And he is, I got to hang out with him when I was a first-year doctoral student some, and his name's Onno van der Hart. And Onno van der Hart really is the engine the impetus, the catalyst that started to change the paradigm. In 1992, he wrote an article called Abreaction Reevaluated. And in that article, what he said, is that because up until 1992, pretty much all treatment for trauma, it was called, look at what it was called. Oops, let me back up here. That all treatment was called flooding, implosion. That's what it was called. And it created an abreaction. So it got that reciprocal inhibition, but it got the reciprocal inhibition by an explosive, catharsis, this discharge of energy to get people, to get trauma survivors on the other side of that desensitization. And Onno went, hey, hold on. We got Pierre Janet way back in 1885 writing in Paris about that he was able to heal this trauma without having to have any weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. All he needed to do was to integrate the fragmented memory pieces and to be able to turn those to get those memory fragments, those sensory fragments out of the implicit sensory memory into the explicit narrative memory. And and doing that with hypnosis, you got relaxed body and you got exposure. So you're getting desensitization and integration of the memory. And that's what's really, at least for me and all of my work, is Onno's start of this in 1992 was where, there were some sentient people in the field that went, hey, wait a minute. We don't need to re-traumatize our clients to help them to heal from their trauma. And, and this was right at the time that EMDR was coming forward. It was a really bustling and an exciting time for the field. And that same year, Judy wrote Trauma and Recovery, in which she promulgated this triphasic model of safety and stabilization, which is relaxation skills and using the relationship, and then remembrance and mourning. So she still was kind of in that, this is psychodynamic language. And, that would be the difference. She's an MD, so she was taught in her residency to do psychodynamic therapy, where Onno is a psychologist, and he has a little bit different spin on that. So that's all I want to say about that, is that 1992 came this prescription of the way to work with trauma, that we were no longer having our clients come in and just blowing them up with energy to treat them, and having them drop out of therapy and get worse. And a lot of Vietnam veterans were treated that way. So fast forward to 2008, and these three professors, most of you probably have already seen this by now, but I just want to go over it briefly. These three professors really, this is there was some earlier work, but this is the most comprehensive, systematic review of this literature. And they did a meta-analysis of looking at all the effective treatments of trauma and published it in the Annals of Psychology, I think was the journal it was published in. And they looked at all the effective treatments, and they wanted to see which was better, which one had better outcomes. And so they got all of those studies, everything that's ever been published since 1980, and they categorized them. They decided to make it bona fide and eschewed and cut away the ones that were just one time presented in the literature, or the more esoteric treatments. They just kind of pushed those away, and they came up with psychodynamic, hypnosis, both of those from the early 80s, cognitive behavioral therapies, and specifically prolonged exposure and cognitive processing therapy, stress inoculation training, and EMDR. And they wanted to see which was better. And they put them through this effect size. They did the meta-analytic research, extracted the effect sizes, and they did that in 3 different statistical procedures. And what they found was is that the primary analysis revealed that effect sizes were homogeneously distributed around 0 for measures of PTSD symptomology and for all measures of psychological functioning, indicating there were no differences between psychotherapies. What that means is that no treatments are better than any other. That no matter what you get with talking heads from the VA saying cognitive processing therapy is the best, or that prolonged exposure is the best, or whatever else, they're not clinically or statistically, there's no difference in the outcomes of those treatments. So that's a big deal. What that means is that the treatment method is a better way of saying it is that the principles, practices, and protocols, the EMDR book that Francine wrote in 1995, everything that is unique to EMDR is adding nothing active to its treatment. That what we start doing now is looking at, this gives us the green light to say that if all of these are equal, then it is not what is distinct about these treatments that is the important part. It is what is common among them. And what you see is that there are some specific common ingredients that all of these treatments that are effective share. And that's been some work that I and Charles Figley, my major professor, have been working on for 20 years. But before we get to that, and I just love this quote. I'll let you read through it. I won't read it to you, but just the idea that evidence-based treatment is probably not. I think this is the death knell. It's going to take another 15 years before the model fervor, model worship, model religion is kind of dies away, and there starts to be this kind of looking at what we're doing, which is to try to grow up clinicians and to make them excellent clinicians able to apply lots of good trauma treatment strategies across a myriad of different ways, instead of this religious fidelity to a particular treatment model. And they're saying that is not a good plan for either the therapist or the client. So, you guys probably have seen this before, especially if you've been to my training. I'm not going to belabor it, but I am going to say that this is what the National Center for PTSD identify as the active ingredients for the treatment of post-traumatic stress by CBT, by prolonged exposure, stress inoculation training, and cognitive processing therapy. Those are the 3 big dogs in the CBT camp. They identify these 4 things as being primary active ingredient for why CBT works. It's interesting that they do not identify the therapeutic relationship. That's the National Center for PTSD. This is a year later came international. These were all on the tail end of meta-analysis that were done by each of these organizations. The VA/DoD did a huge meta-analysis. International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies did their big meta-analysis. And then at the end of that year, these folks, Marilyn Cloitre and Christine Courtois and the rest of these folks, they did a Delphi study where they looked at 27 experts of working with complex trauma, 27 experts working with regular trauma, and they asked them to build consensus of what were the active ingredients in the treatment of traumatic stress. And those are emotional, according to the ISTSS, emotional regulation strategies, narration of traumatic memory, cognitive restructuring, anxiety and stress management, and interpersonal skills. Just this study just came out a couple of weeks ago, and it is from the first author is another Dutch person. The Dutch do a really good job of trauma. Bessel van der Kolk, Elliot Nation-Hughes, Anna van der Haar. They've been, in a lot of ways, have been leading the field of trauma for a whole lot of years. But look at some of the names that were here. Edna Foa, if you don't know her, she is the developer champion of prolonged exposure. Patty Rezick, cognitive processing therapy. Marilyn Cloitre, who is the director of the trauma program at NYU. Francine Shapiro. Those are some big heavy hitters that just published this article a few weeks ago. And here's what these folks came up with in their meta-analysis of looking at, oops, come back. Is these things here start to be like a refrain in a song, isn't it? I mean, it's like the same damn thing. Psychoeducation, emotional regulation, coping skills, exposure, cognitive processing, cognitive restructuring or meaning making, and memory processing. I mean, it's a little bit different language, but it keeps being the same thing. Bob and Anna and I have an article coming out. I think, did you post that, Bob? I was looking for it on the Sycamore, and I tried to post it today myself, and it wouldn't upload. So I sent it to Chelsea to upload.
I sent it to Chelsea to upload, but I'm not sure. I never went through and checked and see if she'd done that already.
I tried to upload both of those two, ours and the previous one. I did it twice, and neither time it wouldn't upload. So I sent them both to Chelsea. So both of these two, if you guys are interested in reading that, both of those should be up the next day or two. This is our study that we did, and that it's coming out this fall in the Journal of Counseling and Development in their trauma-specific issue. It's actually the lead article. And it's basically the same thing. And we have extracted all of these active ingredients, the same ones that we've just been through. And what I will take a little bit of credit for, I've said, I just went back and found the article today, that I published this in 1998 in the Journal of Traumatology. So these are the four things that we, ITP, are identifying as the active ingredients of the treatment of traumatic stress. And that's therapeutic relationship. That is helping our clients to get in. And then I think a more crucial part of that is to stay in relaxed bodies, help them to confront their trauma memories. And the most effective means that we've found for doing that is using a narrative process of turning it into language, and then helping them to make sense, to normalize symptoms, and to educate them about what's going on with them as a treatment for shame and post-traumatic cognitive distortion. And then the last piece of this is and this is exciting for me. And, this is a blind squirrel finding a nut. Having done this for a whole lot of years, is just, I just love the simplicity and elegance of this. This is the research. This is what the literature tells us. As we look through all of these things that I just went through, you see that consistently in some language, different language, these things are showing up as being the active ingredients for healing trauma. But what's really cool is that when you start to try to do these things with your client, is they coalesce into a hierarchy that we do the first thing first, the second thing second, and the third thing third. And when we complete these three things, your clients no longer meet diagnostic criteria for PTSD. We build and maintain good therapeutic relationships. We help them to get their bodies relaxed, which all those treatments do. Every single one of those help trauma survivors to get their bodies relaxed. What we're doing, though, and we're taking that a step further, any of you who have been in training with me and with Bob have certainly seen that, is we step into, we're not teaching our clients to get their bodies relaxed as much as we're teaching them to keep their bodies relaxed, so that they begin to develop this regulatory relationship with their own physiology and their autonomic nervous system. And that's a whole different thing. And as people keep their bodies relaxed, they cannot meet diagnostic criteria for PTSD. You can't meet the diagnostic criteria for PTSD in a relaxed body. And once they have a relaxed body, then we help them to confront their trauma memories and to turn those memories into to remove them or call them forward from the implicit sensory-based memory and help them to turn that into a language-based memory, to give it narrative, to give it words. And in between here, there's a couple of other things that we're doing, is that we're helping them to be able to practice feedback-informed therapy, to maintain and build and enhance the therapeutic relationship. And we're doing some additional skills building other than just relaxation and self-regulation. We're doing some other skills building before we cross this Rubicon and move into to Judy Herman's second phase of treatment, our third stage that Bob's going to talk to you about here in just a second. And then the last piece is cognitive restructuring. And the way that we're using cognitive restructuring is less of a tool for fixing distorted perceptions, and we're instead using cognitive restructuring primarily, especially in early treatment, as a way to enhance this. Is that we're helping them we're building therapeutic relationships, and we're helping them to get relaxed bodies. And when people have relaxed bodies, they have maximal neocortical functioning. They can think, they can use language, they're articulate, they can entertain complex and abstract thoughts, so that we want to help people to help trauma survivors get in relaxed bodies before we start trying to address distorted perceptions. And that is all I have to say about that. It's a good place to take a little organic break and ask if anybody has any questions or comments about that, kind of extracting the active ingredients before Bob shows you how we are putting the active ingredients into a structure to help you to be able to do that in an organized way.
I have a question.
Sure.
When you say, I don't know if I heard this right, but basically if you're saying that we're seeking to kind of take out the whole, I don't know, worship of the treatment modalities, that we're not going to focus so much on that, we're focusing more on the relationship between the therapist and the client, how are not that I care, but how are insurance companies how are we going to prove to insurance companies that we're doing therapy and not having like coffee talk?
This is CBT.
So we just still write CBT.
Absolutely.
We're just
Absolutely.
Okay.
This is all. This is uh, one of the 10 pillars of cognitive behavioral therapy is building and maintaining a therapeutic relationship. Exposure and relaxation, reciprocal inhibition. It's the core of cognitive behavioral therapy. We're doing CBT. We're just not doing CBT in a white coat.
Okay.
We're doing CBT with the heart and with the soul.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Great question, though. Yes.
So this is more of like a technical question. So I'm trying to follow along with the PowerPoint that's already up on Sycamore, but it's not, it looks like it might be an older one. Is that accurate or no? Because some of the slides are there, but some of them are not. I'm just more of a visual person, so it's easier for me to have slides in front
Would
of
you
me.
like for us to post this slide presentation so
That would be awesome.
you can use it for your very own?
Yes, please.
Yes, that would be awesome.
I
I'm glad
actually
I'm not the only one.
emailed it earlier today.
Okay, good. Yeah, if we could have those before the presentations, that would be awesome.
Well, I just made it today, so
Oh, okay.
so that'll be really every time I've done this, I've made new slides. So
I can tell because some of them are there, but then some of them, because there is one posted, but it's like some pieces are there that you already did, but then some are not. So.
Well, I posted I think it was the 2 p.m. version.
Yeah, right. Yes, that's probably what's there. Okay, great.
Any other questions or comments? If no, there's one more thing I want to say before I hand this off to Bob. I had a slide in there and I took it out. Some of you know or don't know. If you haven't heard his name, then you need to. Charles Figley, who was chair of my dissertation committee, and I was his research assistant for 4 years at Florida State. And he and I started the Traumatology Institute together. I met Charles in 1995. And he and another professor, Joyce Carbonell, who is in the psychology department of Florida State, he did something really cool. Now his methodology was screwed, and so it was never usable. But what he did in 1995 and 1996 was that he had some of the big dogs of therapies come. He had Edna Foa there in 1995. He had Francine Shapiro. He had Roger Callahan with thought field therapy. He had Gerald French with traumatic incident reduction. And they did therapy live, and people watched it. And it was an intention of building, of extracting what was working in those treatments. And so that I got really enamored with that, and that was the reason why I went to Florida State, was to work with Charles around that stuff. And so that's been, at least for me, that has been an initiative that is 20 years old, and it's been something that I've been kind of evolving, and it's just really cool for me to see. It just moves me to see that we've got, this rest of the field is coming along, and looking at now an integration of the active ingredients instead of delivering, you saw how many of the big dogs, ISTSS, the VADOD, and then all of those folks in that article that was just recently published, that there's this zeitgeist, there's this energy moving towards looking at the integration of the active ingredients into treatment. And, you guys, we are on the front end of that. And it's a privilege to get to do it with you. And that's all. I'm muted now.
Did you take your screen down so I could put mine up? Make it full screen here just a second. One of the things that, excuse me, one of the things that I wanted to kind of mention is, as Eric was talking, was the idea that a lot of what has happened with this homage being paid to evidence-based or science-based practice is actually, as you read the literature or you attend those trainings, is how they have removed as much as possible, excuse me, the human element out of it. And so, you know, while they are good at collecting data and they're good at evaluating it, a lot of times the things that generate the most change are not being attuned to. So I think focusing on the active ingredients is actually a way to improve care in general. So I'm going to kind of go through this and see if we can explain the structure to you. And this has been a developing project for some time. As Eric kind of laid it out, we've been playing with this and trying to fine tune it. We are constantly in the process of fine tuning it. As you could see, Eric made a change in just since 2 o'clock when I posted up the last version. So this is something that's dynamic, that we are constantly trying to adjust and improve with every little bit of feedback that we get. So with that said, let's go ahead and move forward on it. The question is, what would happen if we use the active ingredients to create a structure rather than focus on a specific model? Or we assume that if we have a good structure, or what some of the writers are talking about, a good service delivery vehicle, could you plug in any model of treatment and make it work? And that's kind of the premise that we have. So we have the IATP structure for treatment, and it's called the Empowerment and Resilience Structure. It is built on 4 basic principles. These principles are the ones that Eric has done such a good job of kind of outlining, but we have a very set intentionality with each of these. So the first one, the relationship building, that's followed by the second stage, which is psychoeducation, self-regulation. And you'll notice there that the third is whatever model really works for people that they've been pretty well trained in, they can use. However, by the way, can everybody hear me okay? I'm going to assume that you can. So then the fourth is the post-traumatic growth and resiliency building. Hang on a second, my system kind of messed up a little bit. There we go. All right. So let's kind of move through these a little bit one at a time and give you a feel of what it is we're kind of looking at here. I don't know why I'm having a problem with this today, but let me just check again. Okay.
If it doesn't work, Bob, I can run it from here, and you can wink at me, and I'll to advance the slides.
Let's try it one more time. Set. All right. So the reason we're kind of talking about it in this way is that we are understanding that clinical excellence is primarily it has to be systemic, it has to be deliberate, and has to be continuous. And what we're looking at is using the active ingredients to create a systemic structure that once people know that they can move through it and take the client deliberately through a process. And that, pardon?
I'm getting a lot of like static, like there's something going on, like a TV show or something, it sounds like in the background.
There's a thunderstorm outside.
No, I can hear voices, and I'm not hallucinating.
I am not hearing them, so.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Open up, look at everybody's, and make sure everybody's muted.
I only see you and I open. If it persists, we will figure out how to deal with that. And the last one here is really kind of fine-tuning the process so it's always continuously improving. The empowerment and resilient structure that we've kind of used, I'm going to go through each of the stages and kind of describe them a little bit and give you some ability to understand how to begin to integrate them into what you do.
Bob.
Yes.
We've lost the PowerPoint.
Okay. I could still see it on my end, so.
I can't see PowerPoint. No, it's just your beautiful face is all that we get there.
That's kind of unfortunate.
It's wonderful. Wonderful.
Let me see if this will work better. I apologize in advance for the technical problems here. Can you see it now?
Yes. Maybe you should just run it from that instead of trying to go to full screen, and you could just transition to each slide from that. Yeah.
I can do that. So let's move into relationship building. Some of the elements in relationship building, and as we kind of talk about this, the treatment structure itself, what we're going to do is give you kind of the basics of how to start using it now. But as you use it, you'll realize that there's more nuance in each of the stages that can be added. So some of the things you're going to include in a stage one is an orientation and acculturation around therapy process. And I'll go through in more detail what that means in the next couple of slides. Creating a safe environment as well as a predictable, as well as predictability in the therapy process. It's interesting. I had one of the presentations I was doing. The person said, "Well, they know they're safe because I'm here to help them." The creating of safety for highly dysregulated people that have trauma is not just your good intentions. It really takes an active thought process where you look at what it's like from the first contact to the last contact with somebody and make sure you're designing it so that it keeps them as much as possible in a regulated state. It is also the stage where you do formal and informal assessments. And I will go through some of those as we get to that part. But one of the things that is a little different and maybe a kind of a different mindset for people is when you're looking at a stage one and you're doing these formal or informal assessments, it's a lot more than just collecting data. As I have worked with a number of companies, they use all sorts of different assessments, and a lot of times they just get handed to people, they fill them out, they look at them, and they get put in a file somewhere. And that is not what we're talking about. Regardless of the assessment, whether it's a complex, highly psychometrically driven assessment, or it is a rather informal assessment, the purpose in using it is primarily to connect with them relationally. Secondary is to collect data for diagnostic purposes. So when we start talking about formal, informal assessments, it is really how do you increase the quality of connection between yourself and the client through the use of the assessment process. The next thing we want you to achieve in stage 1 is to discover capacities and strengths of the client while at the same time instilling a faith or a hope in the therapy process. And finally, the assessing of patterns and developing global goals, and which we will fine-tune as we move through each stage. So that's kind of the entrance into stage 1. So what might be helpful then is to kind of look at what are some of the possible elements of the orientation and acculturation. One of the things we kind of focus on here is your environment safe? Is it one that it nurtures the client as they come through the door? One of the folks we did some work with, or one of the organizations we did some work with, had several therapists that had been in their organization for 17, 18 years. And I really admire the staying power of those people. But one of the things that had happened along the way is they had filled their room, their office, if you will, with tremendous numbers of memorabilia, and there was a lot of things hung on the wall. And when we talked about, is the room designed for your safety and your comfort, or is it designed for the comfort of the client, they were very, very unhappy with the discussion around that and said, well, no, my clients like being in this room. And one of the things that came out within the first week of collecting feedback data on the session feedback forms was that they didn't like how busy the room was. And one of them felt like they liked her, but they didn't really like being in her room. And out of her 22 clients she saw that week after we started collecting data, 2 of them complained about her room. And that was a thing that she had never thought about as far as safety from the client's point of view. So this creating a safe environment is a little bit broader than, yes, they are safe in the room. It has a lot to do with how policies and procedures are operating within that environment. Part of what we talk about in the orientation of people in that stage 1 is, what is the healing process like? And giving people an idea of how a person can move through the training or move through the therapeutic process. And you want to give them a number of examples. What we use, or what I jokingly call the 3 sums. Some people do it quickly, get it really fast, digest it well, and get a home run with it first time up at bat. Other people have to kind of figure out how to play the game and work through the process of, they have to get a few base hits to get around the field. And then other people have to really try on each and every piece to make sure it fits them as they move through it. But what you're doing there is kind of giving them the opportunity to understand that no matter how they move through it, it's right for them, and that they will be moving through this healing process, and you're going to kind of describe it in whatever way fits the setting that you're in. But letting them not only know that there is a process, but giving them some hope in what that process might look like for them. Then we look at, what is it like to work with you? What makes you unique and different compared to everybody else? What are the ways that you think or the views that you have of healing, and how do you convey it to them? The format of sessions is the next place where we go. If you're using feedback-informed feedback-informed treatment, then what we really are looking at is, how do you help prepare them for that? So let me kind of walk you through generally how that might look. It'll be different for each of the environments that you guys are working in, but generally the format of the session would be, you start the session by the review of last week's feedback. Now, what I've seen happen a lot of times when people are starting to use the feedback is they talk about they try to defend what they've done or explain what they're doing. And the real goal here isn't to do either of those things. It is to use the feedback to tighten up and secure this therapeutic relationship. So what you are doing with that, you get the feedback, and regardless of how critical it is of you, you've reviewed it before the session starts. You have a plan, and you basically go through the format with them, or go through the feedback with them, and you talk about, because what they have said here, you are going to do this from this point on. And what that does is change you to adapt to what works for them. And what has traditionally been the case in most settings is that we expect the client to move towards how we think things should work. And this is an opposite of that. We move towards how things work best for them. The rest of the format of the session would be then whatever we're going to work on towards the end of session. And for some of us that are poor with timekeeping, you can use a timer for this. But when the time is up for the session, what you're doing is before they leave the session, you're doing the documentation together. And there is lots of really good evidence to talk about the benefit of that. Primarily, you summarize everything together, and you also let them know that whatever is written in there isn't going to be changed, that this is what you've agreed to, and you're not going to add to it or take away from it after the session. And then the last thing that you do is give them the feedback for the next session. So that would be kind of a way a format could be explained. So as we kind of move through this process, the next couple of things is discuss why you use concurrent documentation, discuss the feedback forms that you're using. Some of your organizations have pretty specific forms that they want for that. They'll let you use the OSR or some of the Scott Miller designed feedback. Others have their own forms that they prefer. In addition to the orientation of what we've talked about so far, you also want to talk about biases and your healing philosophy. I also use biases to connect with the client. For example, if I'm doing family work and I happen to live in a state that uses a wraparound model for children's services, one of my biases is I will talk to the families about how sometimes, because we're working together, I'm going to have to be having interaction with other outside agencies or outside systems partners. And I apologize up front that there are several things that people can do that really irritate me, and you may hear me say something, because if it happens during a session, I am going to call them on it. One of the things that will irritate me really quickly is when people suggest that parents don't want to be fully, completely, and 100% involved in the treatment process of their child. Because while I'm a hell of a guy, nobody would just turn their children over to me willy-nilly. And so when that comes up, I call people out on it. And that's just an example of one. But what I'm using is my biases to connect with the client. And the healing philosophy I have is designed to connect with the client. This is also the time you explain any of the limitations that you have because of the setting that you're in. And, every organization has their own rules and policies. Anything that kind of limits what you can do with folks needs to be explained to them in this orientation process. Next, you want to be able to talk about how you transition people through the stage of treatment. This is how we're going to begin. This is how we're going to move towards the end. These are the things we'll begin to see from normally that tell us it's ready to move into the next stage, how we handle the movement into that next stage. That's all part of that, helping them plan transitions. We talk about the importance of being able to regulate. This becomes incredibly important as we get ready to move into this arena of moving from stage 1 to stage 2 is that a lot of what we're going to be doing is helping them regulate their own physiology. Part of this, and this is kind of a mindset, if you will, we are frequently dealing with highly dysregulated people that have been in their sympathetic nervous system, and it's been alive and functioning as the dominant system for months, sometimes years. And that, if you want to think about it that way, that means they're primarily in their least open system for learning. They're more in the primitive brain parts, and that's not a good system to teach people in. So one of the ways we handle that is we model our own skills at self-regulation. And we model those so that instead of instructing in the early parts of stage 1, we model what we are doing. And however you set it up, like when I set it up for folks, I simply say, sometimes when we get into really intense things, I get tied up on one idea and I forget to listen to the next. And when that happens, I'd like to have permission to kind of stop and get me fully involved back with you, because the important thing for me is to be able to really pay attention to you. In all the years of doing that, I've never, ever had a client say, oh, no, I don't like you to pay any more attention to me than what you already are. They just more or less say, kind of agree that that's a good idea. And then when I notice in them, please understand, when I notice in them that their body's going through this excitatory process, in other words, the sympathetic nervous system is coming on, and I can see it in the way they're sitting and in their muscle tension and the posture of their body, I pause, say, remember when I told you that sometimes I get lost on one idea because I'm listening to another? And they all say yes. I've had one of those moments, and what I do at that time is I marry what my explanation is to what I see in their body. So if I saw them getting tense, breathing changing, I would say what I'm noticing, because I got lost there, is my shoulders and chest are getting tight and my breathing has changed, and I really need to kind of get back in charge of that so I can pay attention to you. And then I do a 60 to 75 second self-regulation that I verbalize out loud to them, that I demonstrate to them, and I talk about all of the benefits that I'm receiving by doing it. At the end of that, I thank them for the opportunity to kind of get me back in focus, and I go on. I never ask them to repeat it in stage 1. Now, what'll happen sometimes is they'll say, hey, that's, they'll ask me to kind of show it to them again, but I never take this opportunity to teach. I'm assuming that I need to get them regulating first. And so this works really, really well for that. The next one, some of the assessments we use in relationship building. There is a fairly good number of adversive childhood experiences scales that we use. The trauma recovery scale is a very good one. And Eric is one of the pioneers on that one. I like it because it really sets up the idea that everything is, to what degree are you already in recovery? Rather than how broken you are, it has a different focus. It is, how recovered are you? And that's something that Eric can address more fully if he wants to. There's things like, there's a whole variety of well-established life event checklists. And then, of course, anybody that's been through the CCTP has been exposed to the CAPS, which is the thing that you would do if you're primarily looking at going to court with a client regarding something related to post-traumatic stress disorder. In the family-based clinical professional, we also introduce the family-based measures, which are the FANS and the CANS-T. These are all structured interviews similar to the CAPS, but they focus on family functioning. And so that's kind of how that is structured. One of the things I stress a lot when I'm talking about assessment is how to use the assessment to build capacity and reinforce the relationship intentionally. And I've thrown some extra slides towards the end of this that talk about that. We probably won't get into them tonight, but they're there for you. And if you read through them and you have questions, I'm more than welcome to entertain an email from you to kind of give you some idea of how that would work.
Let me just add a little thing there.
Okay.
That me listening to that was a little bit overwhelming. Of oh my God, all of that stuff. We've got 3 weeks dedicated to helping you to become skilled at administering, interpreting, and then using those instruments to enhance that relationship building process. So we're just flying over it right now. There'll be very deliberate movement through each one of those and how to implement them into clinical practice.
Right. I'm just rocketing through the structure to give you an overview of it. But we'll spend the rest of the course kind of developing some skills around it. Did you want to say something about the trauma recovery scale while you're talking, Eric?
No, not really. You'll get, it'll be integrated into one of the capsules, and it's a cool instrument that is a beautiful outcome measure for treatment, and it also does a trauma inventory. So it's a really useful clinical. It's not so good for diagnostics, but it's a great clinical tool. And we'll talk when we get there about how to utilize it in multiple levels that it can assist you in your clinical practice.
I think you folks will really like it. So another part of the assessment process in your stage 1 is kind of being able to evaluate some of the areas that are impacted by trauma fairly consistently. Are their relationships and attachments, the sensory motor pieces, where in the body the trauma is stored, how it's affecting their emotional regulation, how it's affecting their states of consciousness, how it's affecting behavior, cognitive functioning, even identity. So these are areas that most of the evaluations that we're talking about will hit on some or all of those through the process of assessing. But once again, it's not just knowing the material, it's then taking it and using it to help you connect with them more effectively. So we're ready to move to stage 2. I'm not going to talk about how to prepare people for transition at this point. I just want to overview. Yes.
That might be a good organic place to just see if there's any questions or any comments from anybody.
Sure.
Because that's a lot there in stage 1.
Questions? Either I'm not hearing any or...
I don't have any questions, but I was just thinking when you're talking about the healing process and the importance of talking to the client about what the healing process is and what the session is going to entail, I think is really, really cool. I've never thought about that aspect of it. That working through trauma can be really scary. So when you tell them this is where we're going today, this is what we're going to discuss and how we're going to move through today's session, sounds like it will definitely increase their feeling of safety and also our own comfort with what we're going to be doing with today's session. So I thought that was kind of cool that I've never really thought about in terms of that part.
Good.
And again, it's psychoeducation that is used to enhance the therapeutic relationship. So it's doing both. It's giving them a safety and an overview of what the structure is going to look like, and what healing looks like, but it's also you're enhancing the therapeutic relationship as somebody who knows what this course looks like and that you're going to walk with them through it. And I use the metaphor of a haunted house, and we're going to it's going to be scary sometimes, but we're going to get through it. And when we're through it, it's going to be, you're going to look back on it, and it's not going to be nearly as big a deal as it is at the front of this ride.
I have a quick question. In being able to explain that process to clients and sort of, the process, and I noticed in other slides that there are pieces around, sort of what's going on in one of the earlier slides, actually, like what's going on in their brain and like, the physiological stuff. Are there any resources that have been created for clients to sort of help us help them break that down into really simplified terms?
One of the things that I do when I train this to people is I orient them to a simple understanding of the physiology. There is a YouTube link, I think it's in next week's material, that's 2 hours and 40 minutes. It basically goes through everything that we would educate a client on.
Okay.
And of course, we don't do it in one rush, but part of this, when you move into stage 2, is where you start kind of going through some of the mechanics of what's going on with the body, how to use this body to drive behavior. And I think it's really pretty useful.
Okay, great.
Part of this stage 1, if you're doing it well, it may take 3 or 4 sessions, but you're stabilizing the client. You're also educating them to what the process is. You're building some tightness or connectedness in your relationship. And so you're probably not going to do a lot of educating of the actual physiology early on, because what you're doing is helping them have a better idea of what the whole process is going to be like. And
yeah, I think I thought of that because one of my clients that I work with is a nurse, and she has a huge, very significant trauma history. And so I was just thinking, being able to connect with her and using her language, her medical language. So that's sort of where it came from.
Well, if you going to meet with her sometime in the next week, you might want to pull the video out of next week's and watch it, because it'll walk through the basic physiology that you would want her to know about.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
And I have something called Tools for Hope, which is also on our website, that in next week's lesson you'll have access to the link of that. That's on we have a YouTube file for that, and that's I've subtitled that the perceived threat, the autonomic nervous system, self-regulation, and intentionality. And that's kind of a whole concept of being able to so what Bob's saying, that what we try to do is we train clinicians is that instead of farming our clients out to some homework, we want to get it in a language where we can do that more relationally with them, doing it in piecemeal as we go through the process, and so that it's more organic than it is homework. If the folks want to do homework, we've got resources for them, but we don't want to have the expectation that they're going to do that work outside of therapy.
That's true. I never sign homework. In fact, I sometimes ask people not to try the things that we've done in session until we've done it a few more times. So it's a little different view, but it works really well. Is it all right if I move into stage 2, folks? You ready? I'm going to assume silence means agreement. Some of the elements included in stage 2 of the process can be, as Eric was just mentioning, teach the mechanics of the threat response system, what we always suggest is that you create a common language to enhance how easy it is to discuss it. You're going to talk about some scientific kinds of pieces, the anterior cingulate of the cortex, the operation of the polyvagal system. And what I find is easier for folks is after I've explained it, is I have them kind of convert it into a language that fits for them. So we even talk about the function of the sympathetic versus the dorsal system. And I've had families with younger kids call it the D space, which is fine. The challenge is you have to remember the language that they pick for their descriptor of it. But if you have a problem with kind of remembering what that might be, then you might make suggestions or 3 or 4 that you would have no problem remembering. But you want to create a common language with all this science stuff because it's easier for them to digest, easier for them to use it, and it also deepens the relationship you have with them if you've created a common language together. You're going to teach the impact of the environment. A lot of folks are not very environmentally aware. They're just reactive. You're going to convert discussions of anger and sadness and anxiety and fear into physiological dysregulation. What happens when you do that is you remove the shame of it. You remove the social awkwardness of some of these things because it's not a good, bad thing. It's just a physiological thing. You want to normalize their internal negative messages. One of the things that is common when the sympathetic nervous system is active is an over-focus on the negative, possibly hurtful things. And so if that's been their dominant system for so long, they have a strong inner critic at work. And so you want to be able to normalize that process. You want to talk about how their perceptions of themselves and relationships in the world are correct from their historical experience. What I find a lot of times is people that have been in therapy before have had people try to argue with them that they shouldn't feel, think, or react to themselves or their relationships or the world in general the way they are. And yet, most of the people are responding based on their history. And so normalizing that, yes, while they're having some unfortunate experiences and they've had unfortunate experiences, they're not bad, they're not broken, they're not stupid, they're not crazy because they have these perceptions. And understanding it's a physiological reaction really helps them do that. You want to normalize that there are certain relational patterns or emotional patterns or thinking patterns that have emerged because of their history and of the traumatic experiences that they've had. You kind of think about stage 2 as what are the things in this section that need to be understood by the client, the individual client, or the family you're working with. You also want to understand that the key to psychoeducational material is to give the facts. We have to do that. But what's more important is being able to tie these facts to things that match in their life. So if I'm going to talk about the physiology of arousal with somebody, I'm going to tie it to 4 or 5 examples out of their life of what it looks like when they get angry. And I'm going to make sure that I have attached each thing that we teach them to something that is real and practical in their life. Now, why do that? The quick answer to that is the more we can connect what we're talking about to what their experience is, the easier it is for them to learn it, digest it, and make sense of it. So make sure that as you're doing the psychoeducation piece, that you elicit from them where they might see examples of these things in their day-to-day lives. It also helps when we start looking at moving into stage 4 of that being deliberate and intentional. We use we use these experiences that we've tied to physiology as a way to kind of begin to move them towards deliberate, intentional lives, and so we want to have laid the groundwork for that. So some of the things that we suggest need to be included, besides what we've already covered, is the human stress response in general, understanding the sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous systems, that people adapt to activation in these systems, and they adapt on multiple levels. They're not just psychologically or cognitively, but they adapt even at a cellular and genetic level to having the stress response system activated. It's really interesting if you're going to be doing family work, to kind of help them say, some of the things that may be going on in your family now are actually related to stressors that occurred a couple of generations ago. And you can kind of walk back through that after you know that information pretty well. These are just some of the continuing things. This is kind of duplicative in some ways. But these are what you're doing in stage 2 is just figuring out what do they need to know. This is also where you begin to do the self-regulation skills building. You've been modeling. So I make a shift here, and I kind of talk about the shift in the modeling piece. You're going to do the same thing, but instead of modeling for them, you're going to say, you've seen me do this a few times. I'm experiencing this. What do you think I could do with it? And I actually elicit from them a strategy that would help me work with it. And part of that is I begin to see what made sense to them comes out. And then I'm ready to begin the process of transitioning to instruction. Because generally what happens is you have people say, well, I tried such and such and it worked pretty well, or it didn't work at all. And that opens the door for you to say, well, would you like to learn more of these? Now you have a person that's ready to receive instruction, and they will actually take it and try it. What we do a lot of times when we start doing self-regulation too early or teaching it too early, they'll try it once or twice. It didn't work for them, and they give up on it. But you've built enough capacity with them, enough hope that it can work, that they're willing to, and particularly when they're ready to learn it, that they're more likely to implement it. These are some of the things that we teach in self-regulation, diaphragmatic breathing. This is a list that it's not a complete list by any stretch of the imagination. These are just basic, fairly common self-regulation skill sets.
You'll learn to do every one of those in this course.
Yep. And probably a few more as well. Let me talk a little bit about self-regulation that's important. I was playing with this earlier this year. I've been doing a lot of different trainings around this. And one of the things I ask is how many people have been to trainings on self-regulation or mindfulness or grounding techniques. And I usually, in a room of 50, 60 people, over half have been to something. Some have been to things, two or three different things. And my question is always then, how many of these are you using in your own life every day? And the crickets sounding is amazing. A lot of times in the therapy world, people will learn these things and they're thinking about teaching it to somebody else. Part of the having a truly connected relationship with people is not being false, not being hypocritical. What does that mean? Don't teach people these things you don't practice in your own life. So one of the things that when I'm training people is I say, you need to have 15 or 20 of these that you do on a daily basis or pretty often, if not daily, because when you start talking about and modeling it, you have to know what all the benefits are. You have to be able to articulate that from your experience, not from your imagination. And so before you ever begin to teach somebody self-regulation skills, these need to be well embedded into your own daily life. Now that may seem like a terrible bias, But the benefit to you is you tend to be more regulated. And it's easy to become dysregulated with highly intense clients. You'll actually do a better job of staying present with them if you have a bunch of these that you practice for yourself. That's my little soapbox. I'm going to get off of it now and move on. So the latter part of stage 2, one of the things we use quite often is the timeline. I'm not saying you have to use it. I'm just throwing it in as an example of how do you get people prepared to move into stage 3. And I've included some instructions around that. One of the things when we start talking about the timeline, you're collecting data. Please don't use psychobabble words with folks. You know, we are mandated to use psychological languaging in the communication of this field to each other, but it was never really designed to be used with the client. So, and a lot of it has highly emotional attachments to it. So one of the things that I sometimes use instead of traumatic events, which I will ask, you know, everybody has both sunny and less sunny times. And I always collect information about the sunny times first. And so this is kind of some directions on how to use a timeline. I'm going to assume most of you already use a timeline in some way or another. But, you know, I'm going to be putting together some an instructional video over the next month that will give you, that I'll post that everybody can use if they want to do this more. I'm not going to go through all of the details here. I'm just going to kind of walk through it. So when you have the timeline, what you do is you have kind of a historical understanding of where their belief systems came from, where their behavioral and thinking habits emerged, and you're ready to, and you've been kind of helping them look at this while you're building capacity with them. In other words, it's not just about the event, but it's how you talk about what's happened to them. So one of the things that I do as I rank this, you know, when it really originally happened, it was a 9, and today it's a 4. One of the things that I want to ask them is, what did you do to get it down that far? Now, maybe it's just a function of 25 years gone by, but it doesn't really matter. I'm going to ask questions like that to build capacity in them, to keep them from climbing into the narrative or emotions and looking at kind of redeveloping their story, their narrative, before we actually move into the narrative work. So this is a really useful transition tool to move people into stage 3. There are other tools which, you know, we will expose you to as we go through this process, but this is certainly just one. So I'm going to move on to the slide 37 here, which is one of the things we have discovered as we do this is that if we are doing stages 1 and 2 really well, about half the clients you have won't need to go into stage 3. In other words, they won't really need to be able to do heavy-duty resolution work. They're already regulating them themselves pretty well, and you already start to see an emergence of personal growth happen. And so we always give them the opportunity, if they want to do that anyway, to go ahead and move into it, but we don't demand that they move into stage 3. Now, let me kind of talk a little bit about this from the point of view that how it changes. If we've done 1 and 2 really well, even if we do move into stage 3, it tends to be relatively short. In other words, you can get some of the significant traumas down to a 0, you know, the 0 on the subjective units of distress scale, the SUD scale. You get it down to 0, you get 4 or 5 of those down to 0 in a couple of sessions, and you start to see all of the ones that are remaining kind of become less and less. And so generally this really does shorten the time that people spend in resolution work, even if you do have to go into stage 3. But let's say you do have to go into stage 3. What are you going to do first? You're going to explain that your job is to keep them safe and to not let them go faster than they are ready to go. I have a bunch of kind of narrative metaphors for that. But essentially, you want them to understand that you want them to go as fast as they can, but not faster than they can. And so that becomes a discussion that you're going to have with somebody at the transition point from stage 2 to 3. You're going to explain a little bit about what creating a narrative looks like and how it works and how to help them understand it. Some of you that were involved in the CCTP have already been exposed to ways of using the tools that IATP already promotes to get at narratives and to help people resolve them. There's a lot of other tools that we will expose you to over the course of our class. You also want to normalize that there are some difficulties. Did somebody have a question? I thought I heard somebody say something. Okay. We want to normalize that there are challenges. There's unwanted emotions, thoughts, and behaviors and beliefs that can emerge as we go through this. And what you want to do is kind of actually intentionally connect when those arise, connect them to the strongest self-regulation skill that the client has developed to date. And so that's so that they can use it intentionally in those times. Focus on discovering and highlighting the strengths and capacities that they have. One of the things that when I am helping people kind of move through the narrative, I'll ask questions like, what did you have to, what strength had to develop in order to help you get through that? You know, what was the thing you learned first and foremost about yourself as you moved through this? You want to make sure that you're highlighting the strengths and their ability to be in charge of this. It's also the stage where we look at resolving any mourning or grief work that is tied to the resolution of this trauma. Then we're ready to move into stage 4. Now, stage 4 is really what I find is when people start to heal on their own, they move into this stage kind of organically. And you start hearing changes in the way they look at things. You start hearing messages that are very growth-based. And what we're doing basically is intentionally moving them into this period of growth. It's an opportunity to consolidate the things that they've already gained, but it's also helping them look at how to, because they have these strengths that we've identified, they have these capacities that we've developed throughout the first 3 stages. And essentially, if you want to simplify stage 4 into a sentence or two, it is how do we help people connect with a future where they're using those strengths and those capacities they have intentionally to improve the quality of their life, improve the quality of their relationships, and to move into a spiritual and intellectual, if you will, or an emotional maturity where they live a life of integrity, where they aren't being reactive, but they are being intentional. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish with stage 4. I know that you're going to be exposed to material that Eric is writing now in a book that he's putting together on forward-facing therapy. And it's excellent material because it basically is how can we help people move in this direction of living deliberate, intentional lives? Because the reactive person isn't living a deliberate, intentional life. And if they achieve things, it's a lot of times 4 or 5 times more work to achieve it than it would be if they were in that composed state. So that's something that you'll get exposed to, and I think you'll really enjoy it. I think we're pretty much, these are kind of based on research that's been around for a while. What are you looking at in post-traumatic growth is an increased sense of personal strength. I think if when it makes sense as you kind of look at the 3 prior stages that they will be at that place, that they're going to discover new aspects of themselves and relationships. They're actually going to change the way they see the world a lot of times. And they're going to be a lot more involved in choosing the life that they want to live. So I'm not sure that I really need to say much more about that piece. The resiliency, there's lots of ways to kind of build resiliency. What surprises people sometimes is that when we get into this stage, is we often have people build capacity by having them imagine an awful thing happening and use those intentional strengths or capacities that they have already discovered to imagine working through it, either visualizing it or imagining it, and doing it to where we're actually planting, if you will, a memory of success before the challenge occurs. So that's just one of the ways we build resiliency to help people move past this period of time. It's resiliency basically is a consolidation of the gains projected into the future. And how do they maintain their ability to be intentional and deliberate when they will face pain and hurt in the future, because that's just the nature of being a human being. I think we're pretty much ready to stop, aren't we? The extra material is there. And it's really about, I'm not going to kind of go through it. I've blown through here pretty quickly. Any questions that we need to address real quick?
Well, this isn't a question, but I actually had the opportunity to see, and I'm going to say his name wrong, but Dr. Tedeschi show his post-traumatic growth yesterday. I went to the Gottman seminar in Seattle, so it was really cool to see his presentation. And he had a transcript from his work with a young child that was dealing with a traumatic loss of a parent, and just watching the mastery that he had in this, second session with the young boy was pretty amazing. It was phenomenal.
I like his material really well. Thanks, Elizabeth. Anybody else? I mean, we're up to the end of our time, but I want to make sure we don't leave before their questions are answered.
I have one more question that's not related to the material. Can I ask that now, or we want to just talk about the material?
Well, ask your question. If it's not appropriate, we'll say.
Okay. Now, in terms of the postings and such that we're doing for this week through next week Saturday, through this upcoming Saturday, that is on the material that you just presented, plus the articles that are on week 2 on the discussion board. Not discussion board, on the what's the syllabus? Or are we doing week 3's paperwork?
This is actually week 3, because the first week is kind of an orientation, and you would have posted an introduction to yourself on the site. That would have been your assignment for the first week. And then you guys responding to other people's introduction of themselves.
Right.
Week 2 is the history of that material, which is what you should have been posting on this week. Okay,
so I did do this week's material last week then. Because what I posted on was on like Dr. Gentry's paper on the active ingredients of of recovery. So I posted a week early stuff I should have done.
That's all right. We can figure it. We realize it when we go through it that you're ahead of us.
All right. I just wanted to see where we're at. So this week is moving on with the same stuff I did last week, so I can just continue on with that. Okay.
Right. This would be the week you'd be talking about active ingredients up through next weekend.
Okay. Got it.
So
I did the same thing as you did, Meg. Don't feel bad.
Bob?
Yes.
Would you put up the last slide in the your presentation?
Aha, there we go. How about that?
I don't see anything. Just
Okay, well, let me get back here.
You got to share the screen. Yeah.
Will that help?
Yes. So let me just say a word about this since that came up. That the first 2 times that we've done this course, we leaned further than we wanted to go into the academics of trauma. And what we've really kind of decided is that we want to make a course that's more clinical. And certainly a scientist practitioner, and that you are reading the research along with that, but less about synthesizing that research and more about deliberate practice, more about how to take this stuff that we're delivering on a weekly basis and how does it get integrated into practice. There's a cool picture of the Bobites.
What?
Did you see the picture of your ducklings were up there?
I didn't see it.
It must have been a screensaver or something. But
It's minions, not ducklings.
what is it?
Yeah, I don't know that they would be happy with being called a minion.
Minions. Oh, that's. Bob's used the language duckling, so I just I used that.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so do we do we do this, post our own 300 to 500 words
Yes.
on how we would integrate this?
Absolutely.
Or do we answer the questions that are already there, or do we do both?
Are there?
There are questions up there, and we answered those last week, and that's where I got totally lost.
So those questions are from a previous course.
Gosh,
Chelsea should get them organized this week.
Yes, and
so they'll just
that
be
is-
pulled down.
So that was what you saw. That was the remnants, and I think that she just took the initiative to load that without checking with us, and